What are the Democrats' 2024 presidential endgame? The Joe Biden problem. There has been some mumbling over the Ukrainian President Zelensky suspending the 2024 presidential elections because of the ongoing Russian invasion. There are many areas to criticize this decision by Zelensky, but the Democrats in this country have their own odyssey to deal with for the 2024 election, and Republicans as well, with some internal and some external factors. There has been a lot of speculation that Joe Biden will run, despite him declaring his candidacy for re-election, and exposes the issue of keeping Joe Biden or replacing him. President Biden has the worst approval rating since Jimmy Carter at this point in his first term, and this is now being reflected in his poll numbers in the swing states that Republicans or Democrats must win to secure a victory in the Electoral College. Joe Biden's slide is so significant and sudden that there are now calls for him to drop out of the race and let someone else run. The problem is, who can replace him? As bad as Biden's numbers look, most replacements do not look any better. Vice President Kamala Harris would seem like the heir apparent over Joe Biden, but she has the worst approval ratings than her boss. The prospect of having her run to his open spot for a candidate only have to look at with dread by recalling when she tried to run for president in 2020 and dropped out before the first primary. This despite having funding and being from California to provide the support needed to make an effective run. The other issue is that Joe Biden is 80 years old now, and if he were to run it for a second term, the prospect of him being able to finish his term and having Kamala Harris become president is a prospect the Democrat establishment does not want. The establishment cannot replace her on the ticket, though, because of the backlash from the party supporters if they drop the first woman and minority vice president from the ticket. The Biden-Harris ticket cannot be broken up, and they forced Robert Kennedy Jr. out of the Democratic Party by closing all avenues to debating Biden, and the press was dutifully followed the Democratic lead and would not give Kennedy a platform to challenge Biden defectively. Kennedy will now run as an independent if he can get on the ballot, but this is an uphill battle as the establishment want to limit his reach so he does not play spoiler in the Democratic Party. Newcomer Representative Dean Phillips from Minnesota has entered the race, and though he does not criticize President Biden, he wants to encourage others to enter the race and replace Biden from the ticket, stating that he is too old to run again. Dean Phillips is getting about the same treatment as Kennedy is, and is having his pathways closed to challenge Biden in either debate or even be allowed in the primaries. He will not be allowed to get any traction. So the Democratic establishment does not want Biden to be challenged in the primary, but also there is a growing concern about Biden succeeding against any Republican challenger. Why don't the Democratic establishment let anyone challenge a weak Biden? Ted Kennedy was allowed to challenge Jimmy Carter, so why not the same here? Is there concern that if voters were allowed to choose a candidate that they would not pick a candidate that the party establishment would want? Or are they worried that the primary process itself would highlight all the weakness of the Biden administration and damage the Democratic brand in a general election? The likely path is if the party is to scuttle Biden and not have to deal with the headache of sidelining Harris, is to have party luminaries pick a candidate after the primaries to present at the convention. This would require Biden to declare that he won't run, but since the primaries will be over, the party leaders and not the voters will pick the candidate. This is not illegal because the parties are private organizations and do not actually have to hold public votes to decide who they want to be their candidate. They may have bylaws stating that, but they can just rewrite them at the convention, which is a normal practice for both parties. The issue would be, would the Democratic constituency accept a candidate chosen from outside the primaries? The only candidate that seems to be raising his profile for this contingency is Governor Gavin Newsom of California. Newsom has been nearly constant in the news for most of 2023 and has offered to debate Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who is an actual presidential candidate, and has been taking trips abroad to improve his foreign policy credentials. This all seems strange for a politician who is not a declared candidate, and it appears he is auditioning as the presidential nominee in waiting. Newsom's downside is he only has a 49% approval rating in his state, and he was subjected to a recall election. He is also demographically challenged in the modern politics of the day. Newsom is most likely the replacement of Biden at a convention selection, but in many respects, especially in the middle of the country, is less popular than Biden. California policies are not popular outside the coasts. The other hope for a convention selection is a very popular figure can overcome the negative weight of not being voted on by Democratic voters. Senator Ted Cruz has been arguing that Michelle Obama is the ideal candidate. Not that he supports her, but this solves the Democratic problem. She is wildly popular with the Democrats and in many independents, and a convention selection would mean that she would not have to campaign for the nomination. Campaigning is something that she has stated that she did not want to do anymore. With the prosecution that are in place against Donald Trump, he may be tied up more in court than on the campaign trail. So she would probably have the easiest campaign to run and almost entirely rely on her surrogates, the press, and her husband to do the campaigning for her. Ted has not been the first to suggest it, but he makes a solid point that this is what the Democratic Party is considering. The most likely outcome is that the Democrats will be split, but will most likely, by a slight majority, stick with the Biden-Harris in 2024 and hope that he can make it into 2028. They won't have COVID as an excuse to stay in the basement, but he still have the dubious Trump prosecutions to serve to keep his opponent down and hopefully fracture the Republican Party. This is not the guarantee that a win, as there is still Cornel West and Robert Kennedy Jr. to play spoiler and can prevent an unpopular president from getting an outright majority in the Electoral College. That is another story for another day.